Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Young, for being back with us again today. Director Young, what do you believe are the greatest threats to our country?
There are a lot of threats. One, we talked about defense.
Just kind of quickly, your 3 or 4.
Yeah, making sure that we have a strong national defense to protect Americans against international threats. I also believe we have to be fiscally responsible. We talked a lot about that today. We have differences on how we get there, but we put forward proposals to do that. I also think we have to look at climate change. We talked about flooding and seeing the cadence of those 100-year floods be every 2 or 3 years. So we have a complex environment we have to solve for.
Okay, so you would identify national defense, national security as one, the national debt as another, or spending?
Yeah, we have to be diligent.
How much national debt do you think is too much?
So that is a good question. One I hope we all take a look at. We believe one thing to look at is real net interest.
No, just how much national debt do you think? When does national debt become a problem? How much?
I personally don't believe looking at a gross number tells the story. I think you have to look at percent of GDP. I think you have to look at the cost of servicing debt. Most economists will tell you it is more.
If I may, how much is our national debt now?
The national debt, if you look at just public debt, is a little over $24 trillion.
Our total national debt is how much?
If you add in debt that other government trust funds
our total national debt
would take it to over $31 trillion. But that is government to government.
And how much does that equate to per American citizen?
I have not divided by the number of citizens, but you know we don't pay the debt that way. We don't go out and tax individuals.
You're correct that we don't pay the debt. That's exactly right. We're continuing to spend more and add to that debt. So let me help you with that. The national debt is about $32 trillion with 330 million American citizens. It's about $100,000 per American citizen. What do you think the average American citizen might say they've gotten for their share of the $100,000 national debt?
Congressman, that is a great question why we're here today. What investments make sense for the American people? And we have a whole suite of proposals about lowering
with us
costs for
at
healthcare,
$100,000 in national debt per citizen, at $32 trillion for 330 million Americans, when would that become an unsustainable problem? When does that become just a tremendous national threat that we've got to deal with in terms of cutting spending? When would that happen?
Congressman, we're putting proposals forward today. The president's policies would bring down the deficit by nearly $3 trillion over 10 years. I know there's disagreement about those, but it's in black and white.
You mentioned our debt as a percentage of national GDP. What is the percentage of debt to national GDP now?
So the percent of debt to GDP last year, it was 97%. This year we're in, it'll be 98.4%.
Okay, it's really about 125% because you're not including the whole $32 trillion when you calculate. When was the last time that we had national debt as a percent of GDP as high as it is now? When's the last time in our history we had that?
I'll take that back. I'm not sure when the exact level is, but
you would have to go back 80 years to World War II. When we had that level of national debt. Do you see it as a problem? We're not coming out of World War II, the greatest threat to the globe, to the United States, to our national security. Here we have similar 125% debt to GDP, and we're not coming out of World War II. Do you see that as a problem?
Well, Mr. Good, I point out we're coming out of a historic pandemic.
Okay, so what was the peak of the spending during the pandemic? What was the largest amount of budget during the pandemic?
What I'm saying is we are.
No, I want to ask you that question because you referenced it. We just came through the China virus pandemic, and the highest amount of spending on an annual basis was about how much?
So I can tell you in 2022,
it was about $6.8 trillion. About $6.8 trillion. Highest ever, highest national deficit ever. Now how much has the president proposed? Now that the virus is over, the pandemic is over, how much has he proposed in the latest budget?
As a reminder, this president pays for all of his policies. So all the spending talked about today, what is not also noted is that this
the answer to my question is we've proposed $6.9 trillion budget, which is the largest ever after we're coming out of the China virus pandemic. So we're proposing a budget even more. How much does that $6.9 trillion equate to per 330 million American citizens?
I'm sure you have the calculation with you.
$20,000 per citizen. Think about that. The president has proposed to spend $20,000 per American citizen. What does the average American citizen get for his or her share? The household of four, $80,000. What are they getting in return for that share in this president's budget?
This president has asked, as you know, billionaires, large corporations to pay more, to pay for these.
Sadly and
investments.
unfortunately, there are
These
not
are
enough of
working
those to
families.
pay for this reckless and unprecedented amount of spending. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman Ferguson.